It's no secret that the human experience is a mystical one. The questions asked the most are, who am I and what is my purpose? We have asked those questions so much that it seems like we've given up and become ignorant children with no sense of respect for the place that we come from and were born into. Many actually deny that such a place even exists. We have therefore been a species with amnesia for centuries who breaks natural law, as our thought pattern and our way of seeing the world comes from separation and monoculture rather than variation and holism. Both perspectives are very real. We can experience the world through anger and sadness as much as we can experience it with gratitude and awe. The only thing blocking our understanding for the varied and whole is our sense of openness and the depths of our individual love. The place that we come from is something we spiritual people call Source, and we have been aware of it through millennia. Despite coming from different places throughout the world, the divine was our first belief for survival. It gave meaning because it united us to something that was greater than ourselves. The spirits from the land, our ancestors, our relationships, and even when someone did not believe in the spirits, in his darkest and most lost days, he would call for help within the unseen. In other words, he would pray to be found, as his unconscious naturally knew that something greater than himself tied him to this life. But Source is impersonal as it hosts the universe, the living and the dead, and therefore his personal voice may have been heard, but the answer was so silent and so subtle that he did not feel seen, and so he lost his faith and his way. Source has many shapes and forms within ancient and modern culture. It's what the idea of God, spirits, angels, and religion is based upon. And that means someone felt something greater than himself to the point that the invisible became visible. And he saw that an energy shaped his expression and an energy shaped a tree. A realization had touched him so deeply that he dedicated his life to spread awareness about this discovery, as he felt that he was found when he felt Source through nature. That's why I believe religious texts in the beginning was not based on someone who wanted to be arrogant and wanted power for himself, but it was someone humble who wanted power for everyone. It was only later that this invention would become a tool of control.
And then the next thing that happens in this chess game that's being played is that biological weapons are released on China. He heard this being discussed in this meeting. They will release a flu-like virus that will be genetically targeted against the Chinese population. It's racially targeted against the Chinese people. It's designed to spread like wildfire and to knock out a large number of the Chinese people. And these people in this meeting were laughing about this. They said, China will catch a cold. Those were their words. China will catch a cold. And they were laughing about the fact that these biological weapons will wreak havoc among the Chinese population. And after that, then what effectively will be a kind of plague will actually spread right across the world to the West as well. Our source was not clear whether this was a Chinese retaliation or whether the thing would just spread out of control in the way that it would be very understandable if it did, whether it's racially targeted or not. These things actually mutate. There's a pandemic that really is sweeping across the world and really is killing people very visibly. And you've got this totalitarian military lockdown in all the governments in the Western world because everyone's going to be in panic about all of this. And then, he said, then the real war starts. Something that would be justifiably called the Third World War, with a much more major nuclear exchange.
If I look what I'm particularly concerned about and preoccupied with today, it is how little the world is unprepared for the fourth industrial revolution. I started to write the book a year ago. People say sometimes, yes, it's a digital revolution. No, it's not just a digital revolution. It is many other areas. It's brain research, nanotechnology, and I could go on and on, the life sciences and so on. It's a fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world.
Now, when the two revolutions merge, when the infotech revolution merges with the biotech revolution, what you get is the ability to hack human beings. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it. And if indeed we succeed in hacking and engineering life, this will be not just the greatest revolution in the history of humanity. This will be the greatest revolution in biology since the very beginning of life 4 billion years ago. Science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds.
Names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets.
There's a joint report from the government of the UK and Germany about transhumanism. Mm-hmm. And as you know, this is one of the agendas of the World Economic Forum. That's not hidden. It's not a conspiracy, transhumanism. And they talk about the RNA vaccines as an entry point, kind of opening that space ethically and otherwise.
Once, religion was political, but now, science has become political. The movement of selective breeding between plants and trees are different to the movement of selective breeding happening in a lab by mixing non-related species for a certain specific outcome. I realized many years ago that the fall of man might not come through technological advancements, but through manipulating with life through biotechnology. The procedure might seem to be done out of pure curiosity, good, and excitement. But when you look closer, we actually mess with something we know nothing about, as we are not source. Messing with the natural framework without understanding holistic law is in many cases a recipe meant for disaster. But we don't live in a holistic and connected society. We live in a fragmented and separated society. And because of this, our sense of source and home is crumbling. And we worship anxiety instead of peace. The influential who started those ripples many generations ago have tried to work themselves out of misery, and they've managed to do so well that they believe that they have become source single-handedly, and the laws of source can be rewritten to the laws of man, according to them. But the only way for a human to do that is to manipulate from the source he has created on his own, which is called mistrust. Our bodies and minds remember what it felt like to lose source within ourselves, to lose trust itself, and we named that condition trauma. What we want the most is to get that source back within ourselves, where power and love works together like a balanced, unified force. We are homesick, but at the same time, we are also so deeply afraid of losing it that in our escape, most of us think it hides within the shallow corners of acknowledgement and fame. We think that arrogance is the way to get ourselves back and become happy. But is it really?
But they're really criticizing science, because I represent science.
When the realization of bigness goes to our mind, we become overwhelmed, and inadequacy becomes our only way of being in the world. And this is when we reach insanity. That's when we have crossed the line. That's when we have broken the laws and framework of our design, where nothing is ever enough, and we're the only species capable of that. Arrogance and ignorance becomes the norm, and narcissism prevails. As the wealthier we get, the more we think we are entitled. And through that, we feel like we get the validation from our parents that we never felt like we got. And that ride gives you ecstatic highs. But the dark side of that is the more you see yourself as the one, the lonelier and the more meaningless life becomes. And even worse, the world gets to be an unsafe place. And you will use whatever it takes to get your safety back, even if it means to extend your hurt onto others. And then you become evil. We are the most dependent species, but we have never been more entitled, isolated, and lonely. Life has always been tied together, but we have lost sense of this fundamental law.
Time for the Hot Topic Buzz. So get this, the World Economic Forum is now looking to reduce ownership of private vehicles.
What exactly is this about, and what do you think that it means?
Well, very simple, Tucker. What this is about is the Dutch government stealing our farmers' land.
Currently, an agenda is at play in order to own everything, in hopes of gaining source and safety back to a certain group of people. But the reality is that their gap within will only become wider as they distance themselves from their own kin and natural design, by making mistrust their guideline for building a new society.
When you do draconian things, it has collateral negative consequences. Just like when you shut things down, even temporarily, it does have deleterious consequences on the economy, on the school children. You know that.
How do we get source back? How do we get one step closer to trust instead of one step further away? The answer to that, I believe, is humbleness. For the natural cycle to function, each being has to be humbled by another being's emergence and presence. That being keeps the order within the system and brings variation to its surroundings, and the being after that will do the same. Without variation, there is no life. This is why people need to be different, and that to limit freedom is in many ways an impossible task, as Source will continue the laws beyond the laws we make. It will continue to be itself. We are trustful beings in a world where we can only enter freedom through trust, as then we choose to cooperate with Source and meaning. But when we don't choose that, freedom and the reason for existing seems so far away, as mistrust has its grip around our minds. Our system is based upon it, and we're about to expand it. And I understand that, as when you look through history, life was tough and unfair, and the cries of our ancestors live on in us. You just had to get by and survive. But now we know we have the ability to see the world with soft eyes, the creativity to evolve, thrive, and love. But the collective question to ask within this context is, do we deserve that? We can't avoid pain, death, loss, sadness, and despair. It hurts to be alive. It hurts to be human. It even hurts to be born. But without painful emotion, love would not be here. Love would not exist. And is that not what we all want? To be embraced when we feel hurt? We are all aware of love. We are all aware of Source, even if we would not like to admit it. If I remind myself that everything in nature is designed to be recycled, even my emotions, and nothing stops, then what do I fear? I am an emotional creature, but my understanding and beliefs about the world reflects how I will respond, most of the time. If we learn to breathe and give space to ourselves and one another, there is a greater chance that we will be able to get one step closer to Source. We will experience that power is something we share rather than something we take from one another. As the more power we take, the more suffering we create, and the more suffering a human creates, the emptier and the more anxious he becomes. Through humbleness, we suggest instead of command, and we create encouragement instead of discouragement. It becomes a symbiosis of emotion where connection defeats the existence of loneliness, and it makes the human experience whole and meaningful again. So, if the entitled and rich could meet up with the humble and poor and share their vulnerabilities along with their knowledge, then we would create connection, and thereby fulfillment. We would start to learn and adapt into our nature instead of destroying it and tearing ourselves apart. The wound would heal a little. The greater our entitlements and arrogance gets, the more powerful it might look like we have become. But the truth is, we have become frailer. We are simple creatures and are designed for greatness, but not bigness. It might be a naive dream to think that we can unite polarities through simple similarities, but it's even more naive to think that lies are stronger than the truth that unites all of us.